500,000 years ago, the world was a vastly different place from the one we inhabit today. The climate oscillated between periods of relative warmth and devastating ice ages. Vast glaciers covered much of the northern hemisphere. Megafauna, enormous animals unlike anything that survives in the modern world, roamed the landscape. Saber-toothed cats with canine teeth the length of daggers prowled the grasslands and woodlands. Massive bears, towering twice the height of modern grizzlies, hibernated in caves. Huge hyenas with bone-crushing jaws competed for every kill. Enormous wild cattle and horses migrated across continents. In this world of extremes and predators, early humans struggled not just to survive, but to raise their young to adulthood. At this point in human evolution, we are discussing a species that resembles modern humans in many ways, but differs in others. Homo erectus had already disappeared from the archaeological record. Homo neanderthalensis had not yet emerged in Europe, though early forms were beginning to appear. The primary representatives of humanity 500,000 years ago were members of Homo heidelbergensis and possibly very early forms of what would eventually become Homo sapiens. These creatures possessed brains approaching the size of modern human brains. They walked upright on two legs. They had developed the ability to create complex stone tools. They lived in social groups. Yet they faced challenges that no modern human can fully comprehend. The central question this examination addresses is one of profound importance to understanding early human development. How did these early humans protect their vulnerable young in a world filled with dangers that would terrify modern parents? The answer involves physical adaptations, behavioral innovations, environmental strategies, and social structures that laid the foundation for human evolution itself. The protection of young is not merely a matter of sentiment. It is a matter of species survival. A species that cannot raise its young to reproductive age cannot persist. The strategies early humans developed to protect their offspring became the blueprint for human society itself. To understand how early humans defended their young, one must first comprehend the world in which they lived. 500,000 years ago, the Pleistocene epoch was well underway. This geological period, which lasted from approximately 2.6 million years ago until about 11,700 years ago, was characterized by repeated cycles of glaciation and warming. 500,000 years ago, the Earth was in the midst of one of the warmer interglacial periods, though the climate was still cooler and more variable than the present day. These climatic variations profoundly influenced where humans could live and what resources were available to them. The landscape 500,000 years ago was a mosaic of different environments. In Africa, where humans originated and still lived, the environment included vast savannas punctuated by scattered woodlands and riverine forests. In the Mediterranean region and parts of Europe, grasslands and open woodlands dominated, with scattered forests in favorable locations. The sea level was lower than today because vast quantities of water were locked in glaciers covering the northern hemisphere and Antarctica. Continents were connected by land bridges that have since disappeared beneath the ocean. The coastlines were different. The rivers flowed in different directions. The megafauna that characterized this period represented an incredible diversity of life. Giant elephants called straight-tusked elephants, substantially larger than modern elephants, inhabited the regions where early humans lived. Enormous rhinoceroses, some with multiple horns, roamed the landscape. Massive short-faced bears, some weighing over a ton, competed with early humans for caves and resources. Saber-toothed cats prowled the grasslands with teeth capable of piercing through the toughest hides. Enormous hyenas, larger and more powerful than modern lions, hunted in coordinated groups. Enormous wolves, substantially larger than modern gray wolves, brought down massive prey animals. The world teemed with predators, many of them apex predators, many of them capable of viewing early humans as potential prey. For early humans living in this world, Daily existence was fundamentally shaped by the need to avoid predation. Every moment outside of refuge posed danger. Movement across open ground meant exposure to predatory attack. Separation from the group meant vulnerability. Injury meant death, as infection and blood loss were invariably fatal. Disease and parasites claimed lives. Starvation was a constant risk, particularly during seasons when food was scarce. Birth complications killed women. Infections claimed the young. Despite all these dangers, early humans not only survived but thrived, eventually spreading across the entire planet. The average lifespan of early humans 500,000 years ago was substantially lower than modern human lifespans, probably in the range of 30 to 40 years if an individual managed to survive childhood. Childhood mortality was extremely high. Estimates suggest that perhaps half of all humans born did not reach adulthood. This astronomical childhood mortality rate profoundly influenced the strategies that early humans developed to protect their young. Every child represented an enormous investment of parental energy and resources. The loss of a child was not just an emotional tragedy, but a threat to the group's demographic stability. Early human infants and children faced vulnerabilities that shaped how parents had to respond to their care. Human infants are born remarkably helpless compared to the young of many other animals. A human infant cannot walk, cannot feed itself, cannot regulate its body temperature effectively, and cannot defend itself in any way. This extreme altriciality, the dependence of young on parental care, is a defining characteristic of human development. The human brain develops more completely after birth than the brains of other primates. Human childhood is extraordinarily prolonged. It takes approximately 18 years for a human to reach physical maturity, and the brain continues developing well into the 20s. This prolonged dependency period means that human parents must invest enormous resources in raising their young. Early human infants 500,000 years ago had the same basic vulnerabilities that modern human infants have. They were born small, weak, and entirely dependent on adult care. They could not survive without constant attention. They had to be carried constantly. They had to be fed, either through nursing or through other means. They had to be protected from the elements. They had to be shielded from predators and from accidental injuries. The vulnerability of human infants created a constraint on early human parents that shaped every aspect of how they organized their lives. Early human children, as they grew older, gradually became more independent and capable, but they remained vulnerable for years. Young children could not run fast enough to escape predators. They could not hunt effectively. They could not navigate complex social hierarchies without guidance. They were susceptible to injury from falls, from animal attacks, and from other accidents. They lacked the knowledge necessary to avoid dangers. They could not swim effectively. They could not climb large trees as skillfully as older children and adults. They could not find sufficient food independently. The period of vulnerability extended from infancy through early childhood and into adolescence. Early humans had to develop strategies to protect their young throughout this extended vulnerable period. The second vulnerability factor involved the physiology and biology of early human females. Pregnancy and childbirth consumed enormous resources. A pregnant woman's caloric needs increased substantially. The physical demands of carrying a growing fetus strained her body. Childbirth itself was dangerous and painful. The rate of death from childbirth complications among early human females was probably much higher than in modern populations, perhaps in the range of 5 to 10% of births. Those specific numbers are impossible to determine from the archaeological record. The postpartum period left women weakened and vulnerable. Nursing demands were enormous. A female nursing an infant had to consume more calories than normal. If food was scarce, the nursing female might become malnourished, reducing her milk production and weakening her. These biological realities meant that pregnant women and nursing mothers required protection and support. The third vulnerability factor involved the cognitive and emotional development of early human children. Unlike the young of many other animals, human children require extended periods of learning and socialization. They must acquire language. They must learn the technologies necessary for survival, tool-making, hunting techniques, food-gathering skills, fire use, and countless other skills. They must learn the social hierarchies and rules of their group. They must develop the emotional maturity necessary to function as adults. This learning cannot be accomplished through instinct alone. It requires active teaching and guidance from adults. The vulnerability of early human children thus extended beyond physical vulnerability to cognitive and social vulnerability. Given the vulnerabilities of early human infants and children, early humans developed multiple strategies to protect them. The first and most fundamental strategy involved the creation and use of shelter. Shelter provided protection from weather, insulation from temperature extremes, and refuge from predators. 500,000 years ago, early humans had not yet developed the capacity to construct permanent settlements with permanent dwellings. However, they utilized natural shelters where available. Caves and rock shelters provided ideal protection. Archaeological evidence demonstrates that early humans occupied caves and rock shelters extensively during this period. The advantages of cave shelter were substantial. A cave provided protection from rain and wind. The relatively constant temperature of cave interiors provided insulation. The narrow entrance to a cave could be defended more easily than open ground. Predators were less likely to enter a cave where humans had established residence and possibly maintained fire. The archaeological record shows evidence of hearths, fire pits, in caves, suggesting that early humans maintained fire for extended periods. Fire in a cave entrance would deter most predators while providing light and warmth. Young children sleeping in cave interiors, protected by fire and by the physical presence of adults, were far safer than young children in open environments. However, not all early humans lived in caves. Many groups inhabited open landscapes where caves were not available. In these situations, early humans developed other shelter strategies. They constructed simple structures from branches and animal hides. These structures were probably temporary and not as substantial as permanent dwellings, but they provided some protection from weather and wind. Archaeological evidence of early structures is sparse and difficult to interpret, but burned earth and stone arrangements suggest that early humans constructed simple dwellings even during this early period. The second protective strategy involved the organization of living spaces to maximize safety. Archaeological evidence suggests that early human groups maintained camps or home bases to which they regularly returned. These camps were established in locations that offered some tactical advantage. Camps were often established on elevated ground or near water sources. The choice of location reflected an understanding that certain locations provided better protection than others. Within camps, it is reasonable to infer from the archaeological evidence that vulnerable members, infants, young children, pregnant women, and elderly individuals were placed in positions protected from both elements and predators. Fires would be maintained at night, providing both light to detect predatory approach and heat for insulation. The third shelter-related strategy involved the use of fire as protection. Fire was known to early humans at least by 500,000 years ago, and possibly much earlier. Fire provided multiple protective benefits. Fire provided light, allowing humans to detect predators approaching during darkness. Fire provided heat, reducing the risk of hypothermia, particularly for infants and young children who regulated body temperature less effectively than adults. Fire provided a barrier between humans and predators. Most large predators instinctively avoid fire, recognizing it as a danger. Fire could be used to cook food, making it safer to consume and easier to digest. Fire could be used to harden wooden spears and other implements. The control of fire represented one of the most significant technological achievements of early humans and provided substantial protection to the young. Beyond shelter and refuge, early humans developed social organizational strategies to protect their young. Early humans lived in groups. The size of these groups is uncertain, but probably ranged from 20 to 100 individuals, with an average perhaps around 30 to 40. These groups were not randomly assembled collections of individuals. They were organized around kinship relationships. Families were the basic units, and multiple families organized themselves into larger groups or bands. Within these groups, young children were protected not just by their parents, but by the entire community. The archaeological record, combined with ethnographic studies of modern hunter-gatherer societies that preserve elements of ancient human behavior, suggests that early human societies developed systems of shared childcare and collective protection of young. When mothers were engaged in food gathering or other necessary activities, other community members watched over children. When one child faced danger, multiple adults could respond. The protection of young was a communal responsibility, not just an individual parental responsibility. Early human groups also developed coordinated defense against predators and competing human groups. A group of early humans posed a substantially greater threat to predators than an individual or a small family unit. A coordinated group of humans armed with weapons and capable of maintaining social cohesion could defend themselves against predators that would quickly overwhelm small groups or individuals. Archaeological evidence of injuries consistent with predator attacks suggests that predators did attack early humans, but organized groups provided substantially better defense than scattered individuals. The fourth protective strategy involved weapons development. Early humans 500,000 years ago possessed sophisticated stone tools and weapons. Hand axes, which were refined over hundreds of thousands of years, provided both practical utility for processing kills and potential defensive capability. Wooden spears, hardened by fire, could be used to attack or defend. Stone tools could be fashioned into projectile weapons. These weapons provided a means for early humans to defend themselves and their young against predators. A group of early humans armed with spears and stones posed sufficient danger that many predators would prefer to seek easier prey. The fifth protective strategy involved territorial defense and group identity. Early human groups established and defended territories. These territories contained food resources, water, and often shelter locations like caves or rock shelters. By controlling territory and maintaining group cohesion, early humans reduced the risk that their young would encounter competing groups or disorganized situations where protection would be insufficient. Archaeological evidence of boundary markers and seasonal migration patterns suggests that early humans understood and respected territorial boundaries. Groups that successfully defended their territory could ensure that the young were raised in relatively secure environments. Beyond physical and social strategies, early humans developed behavioral adaptations that protected their young. The first and most fundamental behavioral adaptation was extended parental investment. Early human parents, like modern human parents, developed intense emotional bonds with their offspring. This parental love and attachment motivated parents to make enormous sacrifices for their children. Parents would forego food to ensure that children were fed. Parents would expose themselves to danger to protect children. These emotional attachments, far from being weaknesses, represented powerful adaptive mechanisms that drove parents to invest in their young. The second behavioral adaptation involved teaching and knowledge transmission. Early human parents actively taught their young the skills necessary for survival. Young children learned to make stone tools by watching and imitating adults. Young males learned hunting techniques through observation and practice. Young females learned gathering and processing techniques. Young children learned which plants were safe to eat and which were dangerous. Young children learned to fear certain predators and respect fire. Young children learned the social hierarchies and customs of their group. This knowledge transmission was essential to the development of capable adults. The third behavioral adaptation involved the development of language and communication. By 500,000 years ago, early humans had developed language capabilities approaching those of modern humans. Language allowed for precise communication of danger and safety information. Parents could warn children about specific threats. Teachers could explain techniques and procedures. Social hierarchies could be established and maintained through language. Language allowed for the rapid transmission of complex information about the environment and about strategies for survival. The ability to communicate verbally about danger and safety represented a revolutionary adaptive advantage. The fourth behavioral adaptation involved the development of adolescent hierarchies and mentoring. As young humans grew toward adulthood, they learned their role in the group's social hierarchy through interaction with slightly older individuals. Adolescent males learned hunting and warfare skills through mentoring by experienced hunters. Adolescent females learned domestic skills through interaction with older females. These peer-to-peer and mentoring relationships reduced dependence on parents, while gradually preparing young individuals for adult roles. This gradual transition reduced the period during which young humans were completely vulnerable and dependent. The fifth behavioral adaptation involved the understanding of risk and danger avoidance. Early human parents and older community members transmitted to young children an understanding of which behaviors were safe and which were dangerous. Children learned to avoid water during flood season. Children learned to stay close to camp at night. Children learned which animals were dangerous and which could be hunted safely. Children learned to move quietly and carefully in open areas to avoid alerting predators. Children learn to respond quickly to warning signals from adults. These behaviors, transmitted culturally rather than through genetic inheritance, represented accumulated knowledge about how to avoid danger in a threatening world. Despite all these protective strategies, early humans faced enormous challenges in raising their young to adulthood. The archaeological record, studied through skeletal remains and other evidence, reveals that childhood mortality was catastrophically high. Skeletal remains of early human individuals show evidence of diseases, parasites, injuries, and malnutrition. Many skeletons of young individuals show evidence of healed injuries or infections, indicating that some young survived serious trauma and illness. However, many others show signs of death from disease or starvation. Paleopathological analysis of skeletal remains suggests that perhaps 50% of early humans died before reaching adulthood. The causes of death were numerous and varied. Infections from injuries were probably a significant cause. A puncture wound from a defensive animal, a cut from a sharp stone tool, or a break from a fall could become infected. Without antibiotics or modern medical knowledge, such infections were typically fatal. Parasitic infections were probably common. The intestinal parasites that plague modern populations living in poor sanitary conditions would have been even more common among early humans. Malaria and other diseases transmitted by insects probably affected early human populations in tropical and subtropical regions. Tuberculosis and other respiratory infections were probably common, particularly in caves where people lived in close quarters. Nutritional stress was probably a significant cause of death among young children. During seasonal shortages, food supplies were insufficient. Pregnant women and nursing mothers required additional calories, which might not be available. Young children, unable to consume the toughest and most fibrous foods that adults could process, had more limited food options. Weaning, the transition from nursing to consuming solid foods, was a dangerous period. Young children might not receive enough calories during this transition, leading to malnutrition. The combination of disease and malnutrition was probably a common cause of death among early human children. Birth complications and infant mortality related to childbirth were also significant causes of death. Early human infants were born in conditions far less sanitary than modern births. The midwives attending birth had no knowledge of germ theory or aseptic technique. Infants were susceptible to infections immediately after birth. The umbilical cord was a potential source of infection. Breastfeeding difficulties meant some infants did not receive adequate nutrition. Premature birth, birth defects, and other complications that are survived by infants in modern medical settings were likely fatal in early human societies. Accidents and predator attacks were also causes of death, though probably less common than disease and malnutrition. Young children fell from heights and suffered injuries. Young children drowned in water. Young children were occasionally taken by predators despite parental efforts to protect them. Injuries from other children in play fighting sometimes became infected and fatal. The number of young individuals who died from accidents and predation was probably smaller than the number who died from disease and starvation, but these deaths did occur. The strategies that early humans developed to protect their young did not remain static over evolutionary time. 500,000 years ago represented a relatively advanced stage of human evolution. These strategies had been refined and developed over hundreds of thousands of years of previous human existence. Early hominins millions of years ago probably had more primitive protection strategies than those employed by humans 500,000 years ago. Over evolutionary time, as human brains developed greater capacity and as human societies became more sophisticated, protection strategies evolved and improved. One important evolution involved improved weapon technology. Stone tools 500,000 years ago were more refined and effective than stone tools 2 million years earlier. The development of hafted weapons, tools with handles, allowed for more effective use of weapons. The development of projectile weapons extended the range at which humans could defend themselves. Better weapons meant that early humans could more effectively protect themselves and their young from predators. Another important evolution involved improved shelter technology. The development of more permanent and comfortable dwellings reduced the exposure of young children to weather and to predators. The development of more sophisticated clothing reduced the risk of hypothermia in young children. The continued use and refinement of fire technology provided better protection and warmth. A third important evolution involved improved understanding of food resources. Over many generations, early humans accumulated knowledge about which plants were edible, which seasons provided abundant resources, and which locations offered reliable food supplies. This accumulating knowledge reduced the risk of starvation and improved nutrition, particularly for young children and pregnant women. The development of better hunting and gathering techniques meant more reliable food supplies. A fourth important evolution involved improved social organization. Over time, human societies developed more sophisticated social structures. Leadership hierarchies became more formalized. Division of labor became more sophisticated. These developments allowed for more effective group coordination in activities like hunting and defense. More sophisticated societies could provide better protection for vulnerable members. The evolution of human language and communication capabilities probably represented one of the most significant evolutionary developments in terms of protecting young. As language became more sophisticated, the ability to transmit complex information about dangers, techniques, and strategies improved dramatically. Older individuals could teach younger individuals not just through demonstration and imitation, but through explicit verbal instruction. The accumulation and transmission of knowledge became far more efficient. One distinctive characteristic of human societies, and probably of early human societies 500,000 years ago, is the importance of extended family groups and multigenerational organization. Unlike some primate species where young are raised primarily by their mother, human young are typically raised with significant involvement from other family members and community members. Grandparents played crucial roles in protecting and teaching young. Older siblings helped care for younger siblings. Aunts and uncles contributed to childcare. This extended family and multi-generational organization provided substantial advantages in protecting the young. Grandparents, in particular, played important roles despite no longer being in their reproductive years. Grandparents possessed decades of accumulated knowledge about the environment, about food resources, about dangers and how to avoid them, and about techniques for survival. Grandparents could watch children while parents were engaged in hunting or gathering. Grandparents could teach children through stories and direct instruction. The presence of healthy, capable grandparents in a group represented a substantial resource for protecting and raising the young. The evolution of human lifespan, such that some individuals survived to become grandparents, probably contributed to the effectiveness of human protection of young. In species where individuals rarely survive to post-reproductive ages, the presence of grandparents was impossible. In humans, individuals frequently survive to become grandparents, and they played active roles in group life. The presence of multiple generations within a group created redundancy in protection. If parents were injured or killed, grandparents and older siblings could continue providing protection and raising young children. The multi-generational nature of early human groups also facilitated the transmission of knowledge and culture across generations. Young children learned not just from their parents, but from older siblings, grandparents, aunts, uncles, and other community members. This redundancy in teaching meant that if a particular adult was not available, other adults could provide instruction. The accumulation of knowledge and its transmission across multiple generations created a ratchet effect where knowledge accumulated over time rather than being lost with each generation. One of the most significant factors in how early humans protected their young was the cultural transmission of knowledge and behavior patterns. Unlike genetic transmission, which requires millions of years of evolutionary time to produce significant change, cultural transmission allowed for rapid development and spread of new techniques and strategies. If a particularly effective strategy for protecting young was invented or discovered in one group, it could spread to other groups through contact, observation, and imitation. Archaeological evidence suggests that stone tool technology changed and improved over time, sometimes rapidly in response to environmental changes or through the development of innovations. These changes in tool technology reflected cultural innovations that were discovered, developed, and transmitted between groups. Similarly, strategies for shelter construction, for organizing camps, and for hunting techniques probably developed and spread through cultural transmission. The development of fire use represented a revolutionary cultural innovation that profoundly affected how early humans protected their young. Fire provided protection, warmth, and the ability to cook food, making it safer and easier to digest. The control of fire probably represented one of the most important cultural innovations in human history. Archaeological evidence suggests that fire was used by early human ancestors well before 500,000 years ago, but by this time, fire use was probably widespread and sophisticated. The development of clothing probably represented another important cultural innovation. If early humans were expanding into cooler climates, adequate clothing would have been essential for young children to survive. Clothing technology, while not well preserved in the archaeological record, was probably being refined and improved during this period. Better clothing would have reduced the vulnerability of young children to hypothermia and cold-related illness. The development of symbolic behavior and art, which is evident in the archaeological record from later periods and probably emerging during the period we are discussing, represented the development of more sophisticated thinking and communication. The ability to create symbols and to represent ideas abstractly allowed for more sophisticated teaching and knowledge transmission. Parents could communicate about dangers through stories and symbolic representations, not just through direct demonstration. 500,000 years ago, early humans faced challenges in protecting their young that are almost impossible for modern humans to fully comprehend. The world was more dangerous. Predators were larger and more numerous. Medical knowledge did not exist. The infant mortality rate was catastrophically high. Yet early humans developed sophisticated strategies to protect their young and to raise them to adulthood. These strategies involved the creation of shelter and refuge, the organization of social groups, the development of weapons and defensive technologies, the transmission of knowledge and culture, and the formation of intense emotional bonds between parents and children. The strategies that early humans developed to protect their young became the foundation for human society itself. The organization of groups around childcare and protection of the vulnerable created the social structures that allowed human civilization to develop. The transmission of knowledge and culture across generations created human culture. The formation of family units organized around reproduction and childcare created human kinship systems. The development of language and symbolic communication to facilitate teaching and protection created human language. Many of the most fundamental characteristics of human society originated in the need to protect and raise human young. The protection of young humans remains central to human society in the present day. Modern humans have developed far more sophisticated technologies for protection. Modern medical care prevents or treats many of the diseases that killed early human children. Modern nutrition science and food production systems prevent the starvation that plagued early human societies. Modern societies have developed formal educational systems to transmit knowledge. Yet the fundamental impulses, the desire to protect one's children, the willingness to sacrifice for them, the investment of enormous resources in their development, remain unchanged from early human times. The story of how early humans protected their young is ultimately a story about the fundamental human commitment to the future. Despite living in a dangerous world with high mortality and limited resources, early humans invested enormously in their young. They created communities to support childcare. They developed technologies for protection and survival. They transmitted knowledge and culture across generations. They created meaning and purpose in their lives through the raising of their young. This commitment to protecting and raising the next generation, first developed in early human societies 500,000 years ago, remains the defining characteristic of human civilization to this day.